Fragments podcast. This time I got it right. I think the last time, Gareth, I got it wrong. I introduced it as Shrapnel.
Yeah, everyone was wondering why there was a German fella on Shrapnel.
Yeah, it was.
That's the first episode in their comeback.
Well, I think we're keeping the same theme by having a foreigner involved. Sorry.
Yeah.
It's friend of the podcast, Iain Turner's back, and Graham's here as well. As with this Fragments sort of iteration, it will be the three of us, maybe on our own, but maybe with somebody along. And Iain just had the bad fortune of being in Belfast this week. I will prelude this by saying we've all just had really unhealthy fries, and we're in far better form for it.
But if there's any flatulence like Gary Oldman in Slow Horses, that's the reason why.
Yeah, we can blame. And if the local cafe that we had breakfast in wants to throw us a few quid, we'll certainly name them on the channel.
Yeah.
But Graham, so far, today we've waited till he had a mouthful of food before we asked him a question. I'm now waited till he had a drink before I'm going to ask him a question, just to give him something to contemplate on.
All good, just a sip of water this time, as opposed to a mouthful of breakfast.
Yeah, the last time took away. We were waiting on a big answer. I think it was a one-word answer we got. But yeah, it's good to be the three of us back out, fresh air, having something to eat. And Iain, welcome.
Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, you're sort of becoming part of the furniture. I think we were trying to count up between this and the Hidden History. Is it 4 episodes? Right?
4 episodes.
Yeah. You're not getting any of the money, you're not in the royalties, okay? You're not paying into this, you're not a shareholder. You're over this weekend because there's an event on East Belfast tonight in the Ballymac. What is that?
Basically, I'm giving a talk. Just obviously, people ask me, "Where's the book?" So it's just an opportunity to. It's going to be sort of a potted history of the UVF in East Belfast, and drawing on some of the interviews I've done with people about that subject. Basically to let people know, yeah, it is being worked on, and here's some of the stuff that you might see in the book, when it comes out.
So just a light-hearted chat then, really?
Yeah, maybe not so light-hearted, given some of the content.
Yeah, I was tongue-in-cheek with it. But yeah, it's good that it's actually coincided with your event tonight, that you are here and we were meeting up. It's one of those serendipitous moments in life that we get to be together. We have chatted about quite a few things today. Dressing gowns was one.
Dressing gowns, yeah.
Yeah. We then covered football to quite an extent, Graham.
Naturally.
Yeah, it was a bit of a discussion that went down channels that took us on the other things about Frankie Boyle.
Homoeroticism,
unlike boxers wear gloves.
Yeah.
Pixar films.
Pixar films, oh my goodness. And how certain individuals were probably broken by 10 minutes of up rather than 2 years in a prison cell. It was one of those conversations.
Of Stranger Things.
Oh, Stranger Things. It
TV recommendations from senior loyalists.
Yeah, and that's what I like about our conversations. You start off with a subject. Obviously, we want to talk about Rangers Grade because of the week that we've had, and then it's where it leads. And how you end up with what is the best Pixar movie, and T-shirts.
It's Wall-E, by the way.
Is it Wall-E? Okay. And it comes from an authoritative source there.
Still haven't seen Wall-E the whole way through.
What?
No, haven't seen it the whole way through.
Straighten that out.
Yeah, I know. The attention span in our household isn't very long, so it has to be something that grabs your attention
It's
immediately.
not really your genre. I mean, you're more of a Wicked kind of guy, really, aren't you?
I like Wicked, yeah. Going to see it again today. Probably about
6 times so far.
2 or 3 times in the cinema, and probably at least 10 times, including watching it at home. And the soundtrack's on every day on the way to school.
And the girls in the house not complaining about this? I mean, your
No, they love it. They love
Yeah.
it, yeah. I just can't hit the high notes.
You're trying.
Yeah.
You're trying. And did you try any of the Wicked stuff when you were away last week? The City Ground, weren't you?
City Grind last week? No, it didn't. It was a wicked result.
Yeah.
Very good, very good.
It was a good seat you were in.
Very good seat, yeah. Brian Clough lower.
Yeah.
So it's nice to see us march towards the Champions League. But again, like breakfast, we've gone off on a tangent, I think.
Oh,
Slightly.
every time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But back to tonight, I suppose. Iain, you're doing the talk in the Ballymac. Is it the Friendship Centre it's called, or is it the museum?
The Museum of Loyalism.
Museum
I think it's under that sort of banner.
Yeah, it's Museum of Loyalism. So what topics, I mean, you're going to talk about issues that are explored in the upcoming UVF history that you're working on, but what specifically you're talking about East Belfast, but what specifically about East Belfast? And are you talking about some of the personalities over the years, or some of the strategies or campaigns?
It's basically it's more dipping into certain episodes, like the formation. Excuse me. Basically, the UVF in East Belfast was formed as a direct result of the violence that happened in June 1970. I think it was June 1970.
It was
just written the talk on it. So
yeah, June 1970, after the White Rock parade.
St Matthew's Church. Yeah. And, that was in West Belfast. That led directly to the formation of what became the Red Hand Commando, Woodvale Defence Association. B Company of the UVF. They already existed, but they were given a major boost in the aftermath of that. And then in East Belfast, that led directly to the formation of what was then called D Company of the UVF, which was the East Belfast Company. Mm-hmm. And then from then it moves on to I'll be discussing certain personalities like Robert Mickey Wilson and Squeak Seymour, as we bit about Ken Gibson, and some of the things.
Jimmy McGee.
And Jimmy McGee as well.
Yeah.
I've been very graciously allowed to use an interview that Ed Maloney did with him before he died, because I was supposed to interview Jim.
Yeah.
Just before he fell ill, and then passed away. Unfortunately, it was one of these people I didn't get to speak to. So,
and I suppose off the back of Gareth's question, we're Bath inherently. Well, I'm inherently Bath. Everything centres around the Shankill.
Yeah.
And if the UVF's mentioned, then it's the Shankill. Yeah, it's always the Shankill. Mm-hmm. Where it's not the case. I mean, East Belfast does have its own history as far as this goes.
Yeah.
And I think it's important that those people in East Belfast get to hear this, but also that everybody else gets to hear that is the case.
Well, that's something I actually mentioned in the talk. It was really important for me when I was setting out to do the book that it wasn't all going to be Shankill. I understand why, previous books and people have focused on that, because it is the hub of the wheel. It is where the oldest UVF units are. It's where the organisations started in the Lower Shankill. But I've always felt that the individual geography of particular areas affected the nature of the troubles in that area and the paramilitary organisations within them. Like in West Belfast, the sort of Greater Shankill areas people refer to, you have all these interlocking streets, and every one of them is a kind of like a mini interface. And, and this has been pointed out to me by people that lived there and people that lived outside the area, that radicalised people. When you had in very early 70s, late 71 into 72, you had the no warning bombs on the Shankill Road. And so that accounted for, why the loyalist paramilitaries were so strong in the Shankill. And then in the country areas, the overriding experience that came across when I interviewed people out there was the feeling of isolation. The geographical and of physical isolation of being on your own. I was talking to people who lived way out in the country, in sort of strongly Republican areas, and they were saying that you saw a set of headlights coming over the hill, early in the morning or late at night. You don't know whether in the morning it could be either be the postman or it could be a Pro V hit team out to shoot you in your kitchen.
Yeah, I suppose they talk about the ethnic cleansing of the border areas around that time. And I can see that these two things, although entirely different, are the same thing. The reasons why people migrate to organisations like the UVF and the UDA, because they either feel as if they're constantly in a pressure cooker and forced that way, or else they're so isolated that they need to belong from some sort of pack mentality, if you will, or sort of belonging to a group bigger than oneself. Yeah, it develops.
One thing I'm interested in, particularly when you're talking about East Belfast, one of the phenomena, I suppose, over the course of the conflict and in the years following the conflict, East Belfast would have always been a UDA stronghold.
Yeah.
So what has happened in the years through the conflict and subsequently to see the influence of the UDA diminish and the profile of the UVF rise.
Well, that's interesting that you bring that up, because another thing that came over really strongly, I did a couple of years ago, I did a group interview with a group of guys over in East Belfast, and they spent as much time talking about, how to put this politely, the interactions with the UDA over the years as they did about, the IRA and INLA. As David Irvin said, in the early days, there was like 80 UVF to 8,000 UDA. So I think, they suffered more at the hands of the UDA and had more, direct confrontation with the UDA than with just about anybody else.
And that's it, because when you're thinking of the topography and geography of the conflict, if you look at East Belfast, you've got that small enclave of Short Strand.
Short Strands, and then you've got the markets next to it as well.
But basically beyond that, it's a sea of red, white and blue right out the North Down.
100,000 prods.
Yeah, so trying to get into the psychology of people who join the organisation in East Belfast, whether it be the UDA or the UVF, what were the motivations for people becoming involved in the UVF? Obviously, you have critical points like St Matthews, and people had legally held shotguns at that time.
Yeah.
But beyond that, where is the motivation, the fear factor, when there is such a small element of nationalists within that community?
Yeah, that's the thing. It was hard to pin people down in terms of the motivation. It's not always clear cut. Certainly, one of the guys I spoke to, he was able to. In his case, he was motivated to join by the shooting of a guy called Sidney Agnew. I think it was a bus driver who was given evidence against Republicans who'd hijacked his bus, and he was shot dead in his house. And apparently his mother was injured in that incident, and he said that he, being on the scene and having to take this guy's mother who was injured and shot him, who was hysterical, hadn't seen her son shot dead, that was the thing that, it's a terrible modern term, but radicalised him. But yeah, in East Belfast, you didn't have that feeling of being under siege, the way that you would have, say in the Shankill.
We would have talked about it as young lads when we interacted with people from East Belfast, and it wasn't certainly on the UVF level because I've never been a member of that organisation, but it was certainly along the lines of, what do you guys know? We walk past 4 interfaces when we're just going around the neighbourhood. Yeah. You guys don't see any of this, so you don't know what it's like. I suppose going back to the memberships side of things, I do know stories of people who were members of both organisations, and UDA and UVF, because the UDA was seen as more open, and because it was at that point a legal organisation and they could stand on barricades and do whatever they were doing. But the UVF seemed to be this secretive underground movement that they also joined, so they could be out in the day as your Bruce Wayne of the Shankill, and by night.
Well, I think the thing with the UDA always sprang up where there were interface areas, and that's probably one of the reasons why it wasn't so strong out in the country, where except in places like Portadown, you generally wouldn't have interfaces. But with the UVF, their raison d'etre was basically the constitutional position and kill Republicans. So you didn't necessarily have to be in an area that was particularly threatened or where there was a great deal of activity going on.
Well, that explains, I suppose, how it stretched out the North Down, because even talking to a senior UVF figure last year from the Shankill, he was sort of saying to me he could never really understand fully why people joined organisations like Down Orange Welfare. You talk about, obviously UDA being in interfaces, but the UDA is being Kilcooley. You'd have the diaspora from the Shankill and places like that. So it is trying to find that reason. So it's the overarching reason, basically fighting republicanism, being seen to be part of that group identity.
And you're talking about your support network, if you want, and how certain areas. Driving through Bangor, you see murals on the wall that C Company UFF Shankill Road or UDA Shankill Road, and you're like, well, how's Shankill Road C Company here? Or you're in other villages where it's South Belfast UVF murals on the wall, and you're like, how is that? But it's sort of they're allocated to a front line unit, if you want to look at it in sort of military terms, and they become the fallback, the fundraisers, the logistics, the support mechanism, I suppose.
But it's really interesting to me, and again, playing devil's advocate, and not putting you on the spot or anything, but just playing devil's advocate, thinking about the nature of, people who became involved in violence in Northern Ireland across the board. But you talk about that guy saying about the Sydney Avenue being shot, but he was joining an organisation that were also shooting bus drivers.
Yeah.
So it's trying to sort of tease out those contradictions, I find, not being moral about it or putting any moral judgment in people, but trying to sort of pull at the threads of what the motivations were and how they can live with those contradictions. I think that's when you begin to get fascinating insights into the human condition and what actually made people tick. Because I think all of us as humans have contradictions inherent in our nature. I think, so I think when you're going to that level where you're obviously, seeing a bus driver being shot, you see the effect it has on his family, and then that motivates you to do the same. It's something that I still try and come to terms with all these years later, having researched loyalism and loyalist paramilitaries for so long. And I'm not just talking about loyalism, Republicans and British Army and whatever. How you think making things better by doing the same thing ultimately, or living with those contradictions.
I mean, the piece I wrote recently about the Nothing Squad and the whole
Yeah.
Big Knife thing, again, the Republicans would have chastised the British Army for illegally arresting locals and interrogating them. Meanwhile, the Nothing Squad are illegally arresting their own fellow community.
Oh, yeah, it's the same. And I mean, I was talking about this to a friend during the week about, torture and excessive violence during the Troubles and how people would often associate that with loyalism. But actually, when you dig deeper, Nothing Squad, interrogating and torturing people, British Army, nobody had their hands clean. It just depends on what the media want to focus on, I think.
And I think that podcast cover was out in BBC Sound, where they talk about the House of Horrors up in West Belfast, about people getting tortured there, and certain farmhouses and hotels out in the south in the Republic, where there was continuously people were taken to the same location to be questioned, interrogated, and whatever else. It becomes, I can see what you're saying. We're here fighting the pure cause, but yet then we'll slip into the mud with them.
Absolutely, yeah.
Ian, could I just ask, your book is an authoritative history of the UVF. A lot of people would say, and critics might opine, that the final chapter is still to be written. Without giving too much away from your book and getting ahead of ourselves and your own project and responsibilities, what could you offer, to our listeners, or what could you say on not so much on the final chapter as your book, but on the end game of the UVF or the legacy of the post-conflict Northern Ireland that we live in today?
I think one of the UVF's problems is that they haven't been as duplicitous as Republicans were in terms of disbandment or ostensible disbandment. What the IRA basically did is they told people that the IRA had folded up, that they disbanded, they decommissioned and demobilised, and they disappeared off the scene, to use Bobby Story's famous turn of phrase, it was like a caterpillar that turned into a butterfly, etc., etc. But in actual fact, what they'd done is they had kept, a shadow organisation. There was still an army council there. There was still intelligence gathering going on. There are still weapons out there. Okay, it's certainly nothing like they had during the conflict, but anybody that knows about the history of the Provisional IRA and why it came into being, the idea that they were going to leave places like the Short Strand and Lower Falls completely defenceless, as they would see it, having to rely on the police for defence, is kidding themselves. I remember one time, I think it was Winston Urban who was on Nolan. This is going back about 10 years now. Saying to him, well, does the Army Council still exist? And he was absolutely lambasted for saying that. But in actual fact, a few years later, we found out it still did exist. If the UVF had done that, they wouldn't be getting as much hassle as they as they are now. I think one of the reasons why the organisation has persisted as long as it has, I think I've made this point before, is that they were worried about other people claiming the name, claiming the title of UVF, and they wanted to keep, a measure of control over that.
I think you're right. I mean, Edward Burke's book is a Ghost of a Family.
Yeah.
I mean, the UVF, we've read it and we've said the same thing, that if you change the 19 to the 20, as in 1922 to 2022, the stories are the same. It's the same streets, the same groups. So the UVF, to paraphrase, never actually went away. But they're mothballed on regular occasions and then they reappear. And again, people are saying the UVF should go, and it's an ideology that they should just appear, but they will, and then another group will, as you're saying, arise and use the name UVF and do things with that mantle. So,
and also the name it's extremely, the UVF scares people, in a way that perhaps certain other groups, because it's been associated with such extreme violence, the cutthroat murders, no warning bombs, blowing 34 people to pieces, with no warning bombs. It's so menacing. And the imagery of the UVF, in the 1970s, these guys dressed totally in black with leather jackets, wearing sunglasses and leather gloves. It's so menacing. That's very attractive to criminals who want to use that to frighten people. So, that's another reason why they wanted to. They want a monopoly on, that use of force.
And I think there's local parties who have lambasted them locally or lately when they've suggested about some sort of leave the stage plan and talking to people, and they should just go away. And that's fantastic. And poverty should just end tomorrow, and world peace should just start tomorrow. But they're not realistic. We need to work towards those goals. They're great ideologies to have and great goals to go for, but we need to work towards them. They're not going to happen with a flick of a switch. And anybody who thinks that the Shankill UVF or the brigade staff of the UVF can just flick a switch and the whole organisation will just disappear overnight is wrong. And I think those groups will develop. I remember speaking to it before 98, the Good Friday Agreement, with fellows I work with, that if you take away the command structure, what you're left with is a gang culture, because those groups, so there will be individuals who will not want to relinquish power in the area that they live in, and they will just carry on, and this time there will be no oversight. As abhorrent as that is to a lot of people, that is the case.
I think that feeds into the convoluted, tangled web that is Belfast, that is Northern Ireland. We have, a constitutional stalemate in the greater picture. We have, remnants of criminality within the organisations. We've got a not insignificant dissident threat that still exists. Groups and organisations are embedded within loyalist communities. There's work that goes on behind the scenes. There's a lot of things going on. Like you said there facetiously, if poverty and all social ills could disappear, that would be great as well. Does that feed into a situation where, we as in Northern Ireland, greater society, we want to fix our problems, but we can't? Is it almost getting to something else in that we've got this relative peace? We've got continued stalemate up on the hill at Stormont. Is it just that we're stuck in a rut? Where is Northern Ireland going? What is the unionist case? Where is the supposed support for a united Ireland going? To me, it goes around in this concept of constitutional stalemate, things going in different directions, and yes, we do need to see progress in different ways. First and foremost, people's living standards and public services, should be number one. Hospitals, schools, often that gets overlooked for silly, trivial things. But are we just stuck in a rut and we don't know where we're going? What do you think about that?
Yeah, we're stuck in a rut, definitely. And I think, obviously you want to come in, Sam, you'd probably be more articulate than me, but thinking about the impulses that drive these old traditions, I think, when we talk about the UVF specifically in, the early 1900s and more recently, the impulse doesn't go away for these organisations, for these attitudes. I don't really know. There's a political stalemate. Nobody really is putting forward an attractive proposition for their corner, for the Union or for a United Ireland. So it's sort of... But to be honest, I think that's better than an extreme being in charge or an extreme being to the fore. That's my opinion. But
total stagnation.
I'd rather have stagnation for a while than sort of explosion.
Absolutely.
98 gave us great hope, and then we worked through the first couple of years. And then the speed bumps that we all foresaw coming came, and we hadn't at that point prepared for them because we ignored them. We buried our heads in the sand and looked at the glorious stuff that we had done, and we rested on our laurels and thought, aren't we fucking amazing? But the rest of the world wants to come and see how we've created peace. Look how good we are. But all we've actually done is a ceasefire. We've never had peace, we're a ceasefire.
But that's the thing, Sam. I think one of the problems with Northern Ireland and with the great and the good politically here, and you saw that around the time of the Good Friday Belfast Agreement anniversary, people here like to congratulate themselves for, something that hasn't actually been completed.
Yeah.
We're not actually a really good model for other countries.
We're not. We're nowhere near it.
No.
But again...
So why is this industry evolved around? It basically keeps people in jobs, gives people expensive speaking roles.
Yeah. South Africa, it's the same. They've all made significant steps away from conflict, but they've never finished the job. And I think we've all picked up our own pitfalls where we've fallen down as societies, how far we've went and stuttered. And just going back to where we are as a society and people lambasting paramilitaries in the last couple of weeks, the loudest paramilitaries for trying to leave the stage. At the same time, I think there was a fella shot in West Belfast. Mm-hmm. There was no loyalists involved with that. There's photographs appearing near enough daily now of dissident Republicans holding weapons and wearing balaclavas. The loudest ones are in the paper, and we're talking about them, but we're not talking about Republican paramilitaries and whatever guys there is, and the constant sort of feud that's bubbling under the surface there. Paramilitarism in Northern Ireland is not going away anytime soon, whether we like it or not. So we need to deal with it in the best way we can. And stagnation only fuels that. Mm-hmm. The longer we're stagnant, and as what you're saying, it's better to have this than have the other. But I think if we have this for too long, the other's coming, inevitably.
Well, the other did come in 2021. We saw that around Brexit and the protocol. And, I mean, everyone around this table knows that when stuff happened at Lanark Way, the English journalists were flocking over here to say the Troubles had started again. And you had people being put in front of select committees saying that violence was potentially an option, which was complete and utter rubbish. Yeah. Although, I have to say, from my perspective, and I can't speak for anyone else here, but with a young child at the time, I certainly did have a small feeling in the back of my head, are things going to go back the way they were? Am I going to be vulnerable? Is my family going to be vulnerable? But the rational side of my brain, talking to people on the ground, talking to people on the Shankill, and where there are paramilitary organisations and people who have influence in them, didn't suggest that there was going to be violence. But as Iain has said in the past, if you look back to the 1960s as well, the media can talk up a good storm, and then people act upon the temperature that they've created. So I think when we talk about the media, we talk about the media coverage, and we think about the Sunday papers. This is an example of the broadsheets in England as well, getting their hands dirty and basically using Northern Ireland as a piece of cheap pornography for people on the mainland to digest
sales.
Yeah,
and again, we also have to throw in that much the social media presence and the 24/7 sort of bombardment, if you will, of the doom and gloom.
So I think the stagnation we've had the threatened explosion a few years ago, but it never teetered over that brink. And I think it goes back to what Iain's saying there about, although it might not be palatable, that we have certain individuals still performing certain roles, it's better than what the alternative is, and it's keeping a sort of safety valve and things. We don't, there are people who would expect paramilitaries to leave overnight and think that that's a rational thing to ask. We around this table know that it's not as easy as that, because there's a whole thing about identity, about structures, about people. Yeah. But But I think what we have at the moment, and I include the Army Council of the IRA, if we're talking across the spectrum, it's better than what we could have if those identities were given over to people who have more nefarious agendas around violence.
I suppose we also need to look at those other actors that are in the shadows and have been since the 60s.
Yeah.
They haven't gone away either.
No.
And they're still there pulling a few strings because I think it benefits, as we've stated so many times in this podcast, to keep everything just simmering. But it's always handy to have something to turn the heat up on every now and again as a distraction, maybe. So that there are characters in the background there who get their hands dirty and make others get their hands dirty and just keep everything going. And none of us at this table are going to glorify and thank those men, by the way, who are holding the leash at the minute.
No,
That's
absolutely
not
not.
our job.
No.
And
I don't think any of them should be patting on the back for not being as violent as they could otherwise be.
Yeah.
The alternative is more frightening.
But we are having a realistic conversation about where it stands and the possibility of if those people weren't in place and the desire was to go back to where it would take us. So I'm not going to laud them at all. I don't think this podcast has ever done that. And I don't think any of us at this table would ever do that. They are there. Some people might say they're necessary evil if you want. I just think that it's just the fact.
We're dealing in reality.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're just there.
What we need is a strong leader, somebody who can drive the snakes out of Ireland.
Coming on to St. Patrick,
Yeah.
yes, and this is
Just segueing nicely there from...
this is the weekend of our patron saint.
I like the way you said, you claimed them right there from the outset, Liam. I like that before.
Around the world, Diageo will be rejoicing because it's almost like Guinness is the patron saint. But
we're not going to mention Split the G.
Yeah, just...
Well, look, what a horrible, cringeworthy.
Well, I'm going to do something here.
Just enjoy your pint.
I'm going to do something here before we get on to that. I'm going to give a shout out to Northern Ireland Traveller on YouTube. I went in, I've seen a lot of videos like that. Guys from England coming over here, going up the Shankill in the Falls, and just, it's cringe. But these guys, Northern Ireland Traveller, Stumpy, I think, and his mates, I actually enjoyed it. I don't drink anymore, as everyone here knows, but it was actually like having a pint with your mates, albeit I would kill one of my mates if they kept saying splitting the G that many times.
Yeah.
But I did.
Stumpy, you were guilty.
Stumpy, you were guilty. Yeah, but I enjoyed it, and I have to say more of that because he is trying to show people in Northern Ireland in a good light. I did relate. I was talking to my partner about this. I did relate to the one where they did the Shankill in the Falls, where he was coming down the Davits and had a good night. All his mates were like, "Yeah, we'll go home now. We've had 10 pints of Guinness," and he thought to himself, "Well, I think I'll have an extra pint." And he went into one down near Twin Spires, and he was under the weather, I think, when he got into that place. And just shout out to him. I've been there myself, and that's ultimately, too many occasions like that. But I think it's a great channel. So no more splitting the G's. But fair play to him. I think it's a great channel, and hope he has a good St. Paddy's.
I think Graham's right.
St. Patrick's weekend. Sorry.
Diageo have hooked onto this in a massive way, and their sales are about to go through the roof.
Around the world this weekend, it'll be a celebration of Irishness, links to the old country. The pervading symbol will be the tricolour.
The tenuous links?
Well, tenuous links in some cases, well, in many cases, I suppose. But there is a St. Patrick's Festival this weekend on the Shankill Road. Local organisations are exploring St. Patrick through the lens of Protestant culture, which I think is a fantastic thing. St. Patrick does belong to all of the people of Ireland. Unionist loyalists are often very reticent to describe themselves as Irish. Many people may not consider themselves Irish at all, and that's okay. Identity, in my opinion, is a multifaceted thing. But we're British because we're Northern Irish, because Northern Ireland is part of the Union, and we're of Northern Ireland. We cheer on the Northern Ireland football team. Our soda bread that we'll have in our fries is inherently Irish. I'm all for claiming and having an element of of Irish identity. And on the Shankill Road, it's not in terms of tricolours and lots of
splitting
green or splitting the G, but there will be sprigs of shamrock, as is the tradition in the British Army as well. I just think it's a fascinating concept that people are exploring identities or taking a look back, maybe previously. I know certainly growing up in school, we were at school often on St. Patrick's Day. It was seen as a Catholic or a Republican thing. Maybe, with our contested history, there is a wee bit of the us and them. But in terms of baby steps or, any celebrations of Irishness, and it's not a case of you can't celebrate St. Patrick or commemorate the day or the weekend without being British or without being abroad. They're not exclusive in any way. So I say well done to the organisers and well done for the people for adding another facet of identity and cultural expression. Because we are from Northern Ireland. St. Patrick is part of our story. We're represented by the Union flag. The cross is St. Patrick.
I would say to you too that
Is there?
St. George, St. Andrew, St. David, none of them are British saints, but they're all within the British Union, but they're all Welsh, Scottish, English. You're allowed to have your identity within that. So I find no issue in anybody who wants to say that they're Irish. I mean, I was there the day David Irvine described himself as Irish in front of the PUP conference, and each individual who got up that day and identified themselves how they wished because they believed that identity was a personal thing and you should identify how you wish. So I'm with you on that, and I think the more that we can embrace what history we have without cutting it off because we think them and own it. It's like the Irish language. It's like everything Irish. There is a large crossover between the west coast of Scotland Gaelic and the Irish Gaelic.
With Iain here being with us today, you'll know all too well. As we see on the Shankill and things, the old flag of the YCV, and going back in the history, it's the red hand and the shamrock. So if that doesn't allude to the
red hand model,
even within loyalist history, there's Irish symbolism. If we talk about Carson as an Irish speaker, and he wasn't alien to Gaelic games as well.
And our Northern Ireland top, what's the cross on our Northern Ireland top? Everything we have here links into each other, and I think Graham, you're illustrating quite brilliantly there that we cut off our nose sometimes to spite our face because we think they haven't own it and they don't own it. It's a harsh, but it's exploring how it fits into everything around us. There was a great play, The Diary of a Saint, held in the boys' model school. I remember being a child and St. Patrick's Day was totally ignored, but as I got older, there was more and more done leaning towards St. Patrick and where it was and where it is. And I think it is a slow-moving boulder at the minute, but it will gather pace.
There has been a bit of othering this week. Not that I tune too much into it, but on social media, unionist politicians, have been lambasted for going to the White House. There has been a boycott from other politicians, and that's up to them. But in terms of unionist politicians, maybe presenting themselves to the White House and to the US administration as being Irish and being there for the St. Patrick's events, and then being, hostile to, things like Irish identity, the Irish language. Irish games as well. In terms of, a lot of people want unification. If that day comes to pass, people of a British identity, will need to be reconciled, will need to be part of the country, of the society you want to have. So, there's no talking to some people of all shades, but, we're either all Irish or we're not. You sort of can't have it both ways, but, we could talk all day about things like this, but I think it's just right and valid to promote positive work on the Shankill and within loyalist communities. And let's face it, St. Patrick's Day is an expression of Irishness, but what the people involved, it's been St. Patrick through, as I said, through the lens of Protestant culture. There'll be flute bands there today. The flute bands are certainly pushing it, they're at the forefront. So well done to them. I say.
Absolutely.
There's a local group of sort of interested parties, the Sash group of Shankill area social history group, and they've invited members of the Green Party up to give them presentations. People don't realise how open the people of Shankill can be to things that others perceive that we shouldn't be open to or we're not open to.
Mm-hmm.
We actually are. But come and do it in a way that's not ramming it down our throats or saying it's yours and we have to sort of curtsy to it. Give us our space and let us educate ourselves as we go. And I say that as in somebody who's maybe not fully educated on St Patrick, but there are people in Shankill who are.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and I suppose we could also talk about the church of the Woodfield. You look from the sky, it's a shamrock. That church has stood for many years, and years that they couldn't see it from the sky. So what was the thinking in behind that? And there will be local historians who will give us the full story of that.
It's probably a Republican architect subverting the people of the Shankill and leaving something behind, to annoy them years later.
And even the name Shankill, we can break that down and look at what it is in either Gaelic or Ulster Scot or Scots Gael.
Yeah.
We're not adverse to it, and there's certainly a lot of us who are open to developing that education within ourselves about it. But again, as I said, there's a lot of work to be done when St Patrick is allocated tricolour.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think St Patrick ever walked under that flag. It's
well, St Patrick, the colour you associate with St Patrick's blue, and that's why we're talking about that this morning. The New Ireland shirts by Umbro. There's the blue one. It's a cracking football shirt.
Why do we then associate green with it? It's that branding that's went with it that makes it hard for some to stomach and take on board.
So Shankill Road is and will be a bastion of Britishness and loyalism, but today the red, white and blue of the Shankill will be interspersed with a wee splash of green.
Yeah. More power to them. I think it's great to see, and certainly in the many years I've been coming up and down this road, there's been a lot of hard work done by people to improve the image of it, because there are brilliant people here and they'll continue to live here for a long time and do good work.
I think on that note we'll wrap up. So from Graham, Gareth, myself, thanks to Iain for joining us for our ramble as in our walk, but also our ramble as in our recording. And for going on that meander that we go on, where we take off in different routes that nobody's ever been down before, that we don't plan to go. Thank you for coming. Best of luck for tonight.
Thanks for that.
Hopefully they let you back out of East Belfast again and let you tell them that you're not a Rangers fan. And not
What do you mean? Any Glens fan in East Belfast, surely? All you guilty blues over there.
Now we are.
Now you're splitting the
If you're from East Belfast and you support Linfield, and I'm talking about Beano here as a prime example, you need to have a chat with yourself.
Oh, really?
To support your local team.
Yeah.
I support Crusaders, don't support Cliftonville.
Yeah.
Crusaders are closer to my house.
Although I think I've been a CP more than you have this year.
No, not for good reason.
Yeah.
It's terrible quality of football. Anyway.
Thank you very much. Thank you all again.